grade 10s. In this video, we're going to talk about city planning. So why plan? City planners have a complicated job of forming a plan to meet the function of the city, basically providing a broad outline of what the city is going to look like. City planners need to ensure the provision of essential services like sewage, water supply, and transportation to the residents of the city. And in cooperation with the government, they set the rules for decisions made by businesses and residents, like zoning regulations and things like that. To become a city planner, it's typically at least like 6 or 7 years of university. So a bit of history of city planning. The first city to use the typical grid system is thought to be in Pakistan and was built about 2500 before Common Era. So about just over 4,500 years ago. So you can see here, there's the ruins of this city, which is kind of cool. The grid system was popularized in ancient Greece around 500 before Common Era, and prior to the Industrial Revolution, city planning was used to express authority in landscape, not improve quality of life for all residents. So you can think historically some of those big, beautiful cities, they were to serve the purpose, or they were to serve those that had power and wealth, and not really improve the lives of the people that did not have power and wealth. So industrialization in the early 1800s led to unregulated, uncontrolled urban growth. These unplanned cities grew haphazardly, and the resulting poor sanitation was very dangerous. Early industrial cities were dirty and overcrowded, inviting in diseases like typhoid, typhus, and cholera. And kind of something interesting, initially cholera was thought to be caused by miasma, or bad smells or bad air, before germ theory was understood. So here's a photo from 1854 that highlights an area in London around Soho where there was a cholera outbreak and they had a lot of people die. So what was happening was people were not properly disposing of their sewage and other wastes. Actually, they were mostly dumping it into the river or other places they thought was fine. There was no sewage system central to residents, and human waste ended up getting into the central well, which I believe was located, you can kind of tell, was around here. So human waste got into the well that all the residents would go to daily for water, and all of these people, as a result, they got sick. And I think all the dots represent people that ended up dying. So that's kind of how they determined that it was actually caused by bacteria in water, is because they had a look at where all of the people were getting sick. And initially, they thought it was, again, because of smells. And it took a while to realize the relationship between cleaning up the air and not polluting the water. So modern city planning developed out of necessity. So after all this happened, it was decided that a central sewage system was necessary and city planning became the norm. So there was an initial focus on improving health, but planners soon focused on other related concerns like opening up green spaces and building better houses and neighborhoods for residents. So the image of the city. So a good city should be both visually appealing and well connected. Public consultation in city planning is very important. So it's pretty normal for city planners to consult with the residents around the place they're planning to determine the important elements that should be incorporated. So city planners try to put themselves in the shoes of residents when making planning decisions. They ask themselves questions like, what images do residents have of their city? What are residents' mental maps, and how do they differ from the actual geography of the city? And why do residents understand the geography of some areas of the city and not others? So, using some of these considerations in planning out a city can help make some of these areas easier to navigate for residents. So, one important thing to note is that cities around the world look very different. And because everyone is different, everyone has their own set of values and preferences. So, really, there is no ideal city plan that pleases everyone. But here are some examples of some of the differences you can see. So this is Manhattan in New York City. Here's Central Park. And you can see everything is based on a very nice, tight grid system. And over here, we have Paris. And they're not on a grid system for the most part. The streets kind of go in a lot of different ways. You can actually see over here. There's actually a radial system. So this over here is the Arc de Triomphe, and there's a giant roundabout around it. So there isn't really an ideal or a standard as to what's correct in city planning. It's about what works for the area and the people that live there. So we're going to shift a bit, and we're going to talk about land use types. In Manitoba, typically in a city plan, the ideal amount of area dedicated to each type of land use is as follows. So a residential area should take up about 40% of the land. Transportation should take up about 32%. Institutional and public buildings should take up 10%. Open space and recreation, 7%. Industrial space should be 6%. And commercial space should be about 5%. So residential housing. So there are 3 types of residential housing that are considered when planning a land use map. So there's high density residential housing, which is more than 250 people per hectare, keeping in mind a hectare is about 2 football fields. So that would be like a high-rise apartment building. So in a high-rise apartment building, you do have a smaller space, and you have less privacy, but they are more environmentally friendly because you're taking up less physical space. And also a lot of the services accessed by the residents can be shared, so things like laundry, and also you're likely to be in walking distance of different amenities, which is also nice. Next is medium density housing, which includes townhouses and low-rise apartments. So typically 75 to 250 people per hectare. That typically looks kind of like this. So medium density housing is somewhere in the middle. So you get the benefits of sometimes having a little bit more space. Most of these would have a small backyard, things like that, as well as the convenience. So this is likely a store, so like you could walk out your door and go to the store kind of thing. So it's a nice in between in the middle. There still can be a lack of privacy. Some of these windows may be kind of close. There might be noise, things like that, other things that you would experience in the high density housing. So low density housing includes single family homes and semi-detached homes, typically up to 75 people per hectare, but usually a lot less. So here are just some homes over here. So these homes, you have a lot more space. You have a lot more green space, things like that. But this can, lead to urban sprawl. And this type of housing typically is not good for the environment. So these houses are large, and all of the heat, you're heating your house in the winter. This is a big space to heat, so it's not very cost effective to heat this large space. You're likely reliant, you can see there's double car garages in all these houses. You're probably reliant on cars to get places. And yeah, things like that. So moving on to transportation, this includes roads, rail, and parking lots. So looking back over here, you may think, 32% of land, that's a lot of land for roads. But when you consider the space that cars take up to store, it kind of paints a better picture of what's happening. So transportation land does also include parking lots. So that's kind of an important consideration when you're planning your own city. And it also includes public transit hubs like bus stations and train stations and things like that. So institutional and public buildings includes urban land occupied by buildings used for schools, like ACI, hospitals, government offices, and buildings used for religious purposes. So open space and recreation includes parks, playgrounds, arenas, fairgrounds, golf courses, playing fields, things like that. It also includes other areas that may have previously been developed but are currently in their natural states. So things like cemeteries or areas like woodlots that previously had been cleared and now they're just kind of vacant, things like that. But generally, like any green space. So industrial land use includes factories that engage in processing and manufacturing, warehouses that are used for storage, and things like distribution centers that ship things and move goods. And I think this is the last one. Yep, last one. We also have commercial use space. So there are 5 types of commercial land use space. So there's local service centers, like convenience stores. There's neighborhood plazas and ribbon malls, and ribbons, which include strip malls. There's community shopping malls, which are usually on the smaller side and usually have a supermarket inside. So think of like Garden City Mall. There's regional shopping centers, which are larger malls, including Polo Park, which is actually on the smaller end of this. In bigger cities, Polo Park actually might fit into the community shopping mall center, but in Winnipeg, it would be a regional shopping mall. Anyways, and 5, the Central Business District, which looks kind of like this, which is where all the business happens. So like office spaces and yeah, things like that. So an example would be downtown Winnipeg. So that should be enough information to get you started on your city planning project. If you're confused or if you would like a little bit of clarification, Chapter 17 in the textbook is a good place to start, but you can also ask me questions at any time. And so for this video's questions, what is the purpose of city planning? What are the 3 types of residential housing? And list a pro and a con of each. If you can think of something outside of what I talked about, that would be great. And please draw a rough is underlined and bold, sketch of Arborg and label 6 land use types. You only need to label 1 of each type. So, for example, if you draw Main Street, all the stores on Main Street as one big rectangle, and then you label it as commercial, then that's it. You don't have to label another commercial area. So please also include a compass, River Road, Main Street, and the Icelandic River. There are all 6 land use types in Arborg. You may have to go just outside the limits of Arborg if you need to, and that is totally okay. And that's it for this section.